Hello class, welcome to the final segment in the week 3 material, and in this final segment we're going to take a look at some commands that can specifically be used on loops and what exactly those commands do and how to actually use them. So so hopefully by now you have a working understanding of both for loops and while loops, how they're set up and how exactly they work. And in this segment, we're going to sort of expand upon that knowledge and do so by taking a look at two specific keywords or commands. The first of which is the continue command, and the second that we'll look at is referred to as the break command. So here we have a for loop that's pretty similar to the loops that we've been working with earlier. And in this case, I've also got an if statement here. Here I have this if statement, if I is equal to 5, colon, and again, this kind of goes back to the idea of nested if statements or if statement within if statement that we talked about in the previous week. So you can absolutely include an if statement in a loop, and if you do that, that's just going to involve multiple levels of indentation. So this first level of indentation here, that's basically going to get the computer to ask this question every time the loop goes through a cycle. And if the answer to this question at any point is yes, then it will jump to the extra level of indentation and run whatever is contained within that if statement. So if any point during this loop I is in fact equal to 5, then it will run this indented statement that's on line 4 here. And I'm just going to go ahead and say this right now. This word is a complete and total lie. This continue that you see on the screen here, because this actually does not mean continue in the regular plain English version of the word. This is something that was introduced in some really old programming languages, and it's something that we've just carried through the years. Even though it's a complete bold-faced lie, it does not actually mean what we think it means. So I would say that and emphasize that until I was blue in the face, but I have to complete this recording and not pass out, so I'm just going to emphasize that just a few times. This continue statement does not mean continue in the literal English sense of the word continue. What this actually does is this means if a continue is run inside the loop, it tells the computer to stop this current cycle of the loop and go straight to the next one. So if at any point during the course of our loop I is equal to 5, that particular cycle of the loop will stop immediately because it will run this continue statement, and in stopping that cycle, it will go straight to the next cycle. So if I is equal to 5, we stop that cycle, go to the next cycle, and the next cycle I will in fact be equal to 6. But if we don't run that continue statement, then the loop can continue on to running this print statement on line 5 here, just simply printing out what the value of I is. So once again, continue does not mean continue. If a continue is ever run at any point during the loop, that means stop this current cycle or stop this current iteration of the loop and go straight to the next one, and do that as soon as that continue statement is run. So it's basically something that is effective immediately. It takes effect once the program reaches that point in the program. So once this continue statement is reached, that means stop that iteration, go to the next one. Once again, third time, maybe the fourth time I've said it, continue does not mean continue. It means stop this iteration and go to the next one. I'm sorry computer scientists made this wildly confusing, but that's just something that we have to learn and deal with. So thank those people from several decades ago that decided to use this word. So just like before, let's go ahead and take a look at this in a table to sort of get an idea of what exactly is going on as the loop progresses. So this is just the program that we had earlier, and let's again go ahead and make a table. Now this time I'm not going to worry about the cycle number because we're not really interested in how many times we actually go through the loop. What we are interested in though is what the variable I is equal to, and we're also interested in the fact that if this print statement is ever going to run. So here we're going to be worrying about, will this print statement actually run for each particular cycle through the loop? So again, for I in range 0, 10, meaning I starts off being 0, we will go up to but not including 10, and we will step up by 1 every time we go through the loop. So I starts off at 0. We ask this question, is I equal to 5? That is not true. So we don't run this indented statement, and that means we're allowed to run this print statement, which is just going to print out the value of I, which is in fact equal to 0. Now let's go to when I is equal to 1. We ask this question again. that question fails, or that condition fails. So we don't run the continue statement. We print out what the value of I is, which is 1. Now we go to I equals 2. And again, we ask this question, is I equal to 5? That is not the case. So we don't run this indented statement below the if, and we instead run this print statement like we've did in the previous cycle. So when I is equal to 2, we print out what the value of I is, which is in fact equal to 2. Now we go to I equals 3, the next value in the range of values that I is going to cover. Again, we ask this question, is I equal to 5? That is not true. 3 is not equal to 5, so we ignore this continue statement and simply proceed normally, printing out what the value of I is. Now we go to the next value of I, which is 4. We again ask this question, is I equal to 5? 4 is not equal to 5, so again we ignore this indentation that appears directly below the if statement, which means we are allowed to print out what the value of I is, which in this case is 4. Now let's go to the case when I is equal to 5. Now this condition is met. I is in fact equal to 5, so that means we run this extra level of indentation that appears directly below the if statement, which means we run the continue. And again, continue does not literally mean continue. It means terminate this iteration or stop this iteration and go directly to the next one, effective immediately. So when I is equal to 5, we run this continue statement, which means terminate this iteration, go to the next one. And since that takes effect immediately, that means we're not going to print out the value of I. Anything that appears below the continue will be completely ignored and disregarded if the continue statement is run. So in this case, when I is equal to 5, we hit the continue statement, which means any statements that appear after the continue that are part of the loop will be something that the program completely disregards. So in this case, when I is equal to 5, we hit the continue statement, which means go to the next iteration, which means we don't print out what the value of I is, because we told the computer we wanted to stop this iteration immediately, don't go on any further, and go straight to the next iteration, and then go from there. So in doing that, we now let I go to the next value, which is 6. And again, we ask this condition, is 6 equal to 5? It is not the case, so we continue onward, printing out what the value of I is. And then when I is equal to 7, same thing. We ask if I is equal to 5, which is not the case, so we just proceed onward, printing out what the value of I is. And then when I is equal to 8, this condition fails yet again, and that means we print out what the value of I is. And when I is equal to 9, the final value in this particular range, we again ask the same question, get an answer of no, which means we don't run the continue statement, and we just simply print out what the value of 9 is. So I kind of alluded to this when we were going through this exercise, but I'll go ahead and state it in more direct terms. If you have a continue statement and you have nothing below it, the continue statement is completely inconsequential. The continue statement will only have an effect if there are any statements after it that could be glossed over or ignored. So I'll actually demonstrate what I mean by that very shortly, but first let's get some verification on the result that we just deduced. And running this program, you can see we get every value of I except for 5, which is what we deduced from this table over here. Now I'll go ahead and illustrate what exactly I meant earlier. So let me go ahead and make a change here. And this is something I see very commonly, especially among people who are new to this. They think that they have to put a continue at the very end of a loop. No, you don't need to do this. We looked at several loops where this wasn't the case. In fact, you could if you put the continue down here, then that's really not going to affect anything, because remember, continue does not literally mean continue. It means stop this current iteration and then go to the next one, thereby ignoring anything that appears directly below it or anything that appears after it. And since there are no indentations part of this loop that appear after the continue statement, this is completely inconsequential. This is not going to affect the program's operation at all. What would affect the program's operation is if I reverse the order here. So now there's a statement that the loop can actually skip over. And you see in this case, it doesn't print out what the value of I is at all, because every time we go through the loop, it's being told to stop this iteration of the loop and go to the next one. So just some things to keep in mind about the continue statement, and I'll say this is, I probably sound like a broken record, but again, continue does not mean the English version of the word. It in fact means something completely counterintuitive and non-English at all. My apologies for that. That's just the way computer science was developed. So that's our lovely continue statement. Let's take a look at the final statement that we're going to talk about, which is a little bit more intuitive and also a little bit easier to understand. And that is the break statement. So we have the same loop that we had before with the same condition, except this time we have the word break instead of the word continue. And again, the word and when a continue is reached, it means stop this iteration and go to the next one. If the computer encounters a break statement as part of the loop, then that means terminate the loop entirely at that point in the program. So if a break statement is ever run, if the computer ever acts on a break statement, then at that point in the program, the loop terminates entirely. It does not go to any next iterations. It just kills the loop entirely, and then the program will proceed from there to anything that's unindented below that. So again, let's go back to our nifty tables to sort of illustrate that process. So again, just like before, we'll go ahead and fill this table out. I first starts off at 0. We ask this question. That is not the case, so we do print out what the value of I is. Then we go to the next value of I, which is 1. Again, this condition fails, so we don't run the break statement, and we do in fact print out what the value of 1 is. Then we go to I equals 2. Again, ask this question, which is not the case. 2 is not equal to 5, so we don't run this break, and we print out what the value of I is. And then we go to I equals 3. Again, ask this question. 3 is not equal to 5, so we don't run this break, and we print out what the value of I is. Then the next cycle through the loop, I is equal to 4. And again, we ask the same question again, and we don't run the break statement because this condition fails, so we print out what the value of I is. And now the interesting part happens when I is equal to 5. Now this condition is met, which means we run this break statement, which terminates the loop entirely, which means we don't print out what the value of I is. And since the loop is terminated entirely, then the loop is no longer running. So we don't get 6, 7, 8, or 9 printed out either. So in the case of the continue statement, where we terminate just a single iteration or terminate select iterations that we don't want the computer to run, the break statement just completely terminates the loop entirely right then and there. So let's go ahead and verify that result. So if this is in fact to be believed, then we should in fact see the result that we reduced from the table. We get 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, no 5, no 6, no 7, no 8, no 9, which is what we deduced from this table here. So that's going to do it for this final segment, just taking a look at some statements you can use to control your loops, that control the loops that you build. Hopefully I don't need to say it again, but the continue statement is not, the continue does not mean the English version of the word. I hope I've emphasized that enough. I haven't gotten blue in the face just yet, but I hope that I've emphasized that enough. But yeah, that's going to do it for this final segment. A look at the continue and break statements. So that's going to do it for the week 3 materials. So with that, I will see you all in the next weekly unit.